My name's Cormac Champion. I have a fundraising agency called Pro Fundraising Services. Been running for 5 or 6 years in Australia. We operate nationally with both directly employed fundraisers in streets and shopping centres, as well as outsourcing our contracts to smaller fundraising agencies that which has been a growing trend over the last few years in Australia, but we've done it from our inception onwards. Outsourcing those contracts to smaller fundraising agencies who we work very closely with. Our primary focus is donor acquisition for regular giving. So we work in RGs directly engaging donors on the streets or in shopping centres. Our fundraisers will stop them on the street, and their job is really to inspire them and champion the charities' causes, and inspire those donors on the spot in a 3 to 5 minute conversation to become a regular monthly donor. The objective being long-term donors, 3 to 5 years in general, is what the fundraisers are looking to get the donors to do. And it's as I'm sure everyone would be aware, it's a very large part of most charities' incomes these days. I've been in the industry myself for 15 years, and Pro Fundraising has been running for probably six years now. So the fundraisers will stop people in these private sites or on the street and basically sign them up on the spot. In the end of March, basically Australia went into a lockdown. So over the last 8 weeks, there hasn't been any fundraising happening apart from phones. As far as the regular RG acquisitions, regular giving acquisitions goes. So coronavirus has obviously had a sudden and huge impact on the industry in coming to a screeching halt. And that will have various effects, both good and bad going forward. But obviously the impact has been the end of fundraising at the time, and everyone trying to do something with their 8 weeks in the meantime. We've just heard from the regulatory organisation in Australia, the PFRA, that it can have a staged restart from June, which will be beginning with shopping centres, private sites, and then moving on in July to public sites. So there's been a reaction from the charities themselves, individual to each charity and their needs, whether they moved their budget into digital or phones, if they save that budget, and it's different for each charity as to how they're going to restart and when, but the industry itself is now allowed to restart as of June. There are a few to which COVID-19 is quite relevant in what they do, but they need to be, and they are being relatively cautious to, during this period, from what I know, they would be being relatively cautious in how they would approach the subject. A few of our fundraisers have moved into tele-fundraising, and even from simple things like, no matter what the charity is, on the phones mentioning the elephant in the room. As far as charities that would be fundraising and putting more of their marketing discussion points to be talking about what they're doing with COVID-19, the charities that we work with that we have contracts with, the clients that are very, very close to the subject matter, I don't think they've been, it's not their way to really try to take advantage of the public's feelings so much. So as far as charities over here aren't banging on about the subject in a way that is in order to try and do some fundraising out of it. It's a much more of it's an honest and realistic approach, is not to be trying to take advantage of the situation, but whilst also still mentioning the elephant in the room. Well, Australia's had a hell of a year, and we started off with the country on fire, and then there were places that within 4 to 6 weeks of evacuating for bushfires had floods. And then moving from bushfires, obviously the bushfires were a much bigger issue than the floods, but it was amazing that there were places that were dealing with bushfires that were then dealing with floods, and then going into coronavirus. As far as public's perception, I think Australians tend to be pretty stoic when it comes to dealing with environmental sorts of things. And I actually think the future results over the next 6 to 12 months could well result in more public generosity. I think Australians tend to be good at banding together, and I think our former Governor General once said that Australians seem to naturally form teams and try to look after each other, as opposed to an individualistic sort of approach to a crisis. So I actually think that on the other side of things, Australians that can support a charity will become more generous. I saw a little bit of that around the time of the GFC, and the GFC, which pretty much dodged us here, but people do tend to start thinking about others and those that might be affected by things. So I think that I don't think that it will result in the public putting their wallets away, although something like 1 million people lost their jobs in the last over the last 6 weeks. So that's obviously going to have an effect, especially in face-to-face fundraising, where we can only be signing up certain members of the public, people that are working a minimum certain number of hours per week and that are over a certain age and stuff like that. So there will be donors that previously could have been signed up that now shouldn't be signed up. On the other hand, there will be donors that previously may not have considered supporting a charity that works in, say, a medical research or a medical support area, who will now have that more front of their minds. Yeah. So I think in the long term, it should well balance out once fundraising is able to get back out and be more in the public's view. So there's those options available in Evergiving. I'm told that in New Zealand things, but they are considering them, and all of them are things that are very quickly being put in place. There's also been simpler ideas floated around, such as having a stylus that can sign on the tablet device that the donor just takes with them. So give them a stylus wrapped in cellophane straight from the manufacturer. Yeah. They sign with that, and that's their and they take that with them. And that could be done both by the agencies, and there is a very clever charity clients, progressive thinking, that is considering making those styluses part of the takeaway welcome pack that the donors might have. So these ideas are happening very quickly, and it will all get implemented suddenly. Australia tends to be pretty good at adopting. Although we can be a conservative place, we definitely adopt technology rapidly and easily. So yeah, those things are happening, and it's over the next 2 weeks before face-to-face starts again on the 1st of June. We might see those things fully ready to go and implemented, and that just becomes the new normal. And certainly new normal will be donor distancing and making sure that you don't cross that 1.5 metre distance between yourself and the donor. The regulatory organisation, the PFRA, has been working very hard over the last few years to implement across-the-board behaviours, such as not shaking the donor's hand, which was always a bad practice anyway, but attempting to stop donors with a handshake. They've been trying to stamp that out over the last couple of years, and as a result of coronavirus, I would say they will now have completely succeeded. Any donor that attempts to shake a donor's hand any fundraiser that attempts to shake a donor's hand as part of the stop will probably be told off immediately by the donor on the street. And the penalties for doing that have just been announced that they will be very severe. So I would say that that'll be a practice that will be a thing of the past. A lot of fundraisers would take photos with the donor selfies, themselves and the donor, saying, yeah, look, this new donor that we've just gotten on board. I think that will become a different behaviour. A donor selfie might be taken from a distance with the donor holding their welcome pack and a big smile on their face, if it's done at all. You certainly can't be standing next to a donor with your arm around them anymore going, hey, look at this new Yeah, that's an interesting question. Those rules have changed slightly and developed and evolved over the years, and it's really always driven by the ROI, driven by the quality of the donors. And one of the major factors that it's always come out through any data analysis has always been the age of the donor versus the amount they're signing up for. And I've although we have a rule in regards to the number of hours that a donor has to work in order for them to qualify per week, in order for them to qualify to be an invoiceable donor. I know a lot of other organizations don't so much have that working criteria. They have more of an age versus how much the donor signs up for kind of thing. When I first started fundraising, the minimum age was 18. And then it moved to 21. And I know that in the UK, it's generally 25 years of age across the board. I don't necessarily see those things changing. In Australia, all of our clients are now, well, we have a rule internally of the minimum age being 23 and have had for a while. Some of our clients have their minimum age at 24. Other clients have it at, other charities have it at 25. But mostly in Australia, it's still 21, although we only do 23 and up. I can't really necessarily see that changing, but I think there will be a greater renewed focus. There should be a greater renewed focus on whether the donor is working, because that's going to be a big factor in determining whether that donor is able to continue donating. And that's the whole point of face-to-face. We're not out there collecting signatures. The idea is to be out there signing up donors who are long-term donors. And if they're not long-term donors, they're not going to do it for 3, 4, 5 years. It's a waste of the charity's money. They'd do better off to put their money in the bank. So I don't necessarily see that changing post-COVID, apart from there could be a greater focus on how many hours a week the donor works. But a lot of agencies and a lot of charities already have that. And certainly if they're signing up, say, people on some sort of government support pension, or students, or people who aren't working very much or at all, if they were signing those sort of donors up in the past, it would generally have been at a much, much lower price point for the charities. So that actually, the main thing is the cost per acquisition and how that affects the return on investment. And as long as those things are considered, then the industry is valuable and its longevity is assured. But post-COVID, I think it'll be very important, especially regarding an economy that is most likely in recession right now. And if that were to get worse, if the economy doesn't recover rapidly, then it will definitely have more and more of a focus on whether the donor can afford the donations. Average gifts could potentially go down, but I think it's more likely that average ages will go up than average gifts go down. And the charities may well enforce and insist on certain changes, but their data analysis that tells them, okay, this is the donor that now is looking like being valuable. So that's the one that we need to incentivize, and that's yeah, well, just I actually am fairly optimistic. Obviously, charities have taken a major blow, and a few of our clients in conversations with a few of the clients have mentioned how dramatic the effect has been. I was told that in the UK, in the first month or so of their lockdown, they lost about 50% of their regular donors through people losing their jobs and calling up to cancel. But I also heard that in Australia it wasn't as bad, and that didn't really happen. And although in the month of March there may have been a drop, in April the cancellation rate was actually very, very low. And I'd heard that from a few other agencies, and that was something that we saw as well. So although I'm fairly optimistic that there might not have been a huge cancellation rate, the problem will have been that the reliance on signing up new donors every day has had a, will have basically lost 3 months out of the year. So the charities have suffered quite a blow in that there will probably be, a whole quarter in this year's budgets that there's that big a hole. But I think that it will be picked up just as rapidly on the other side, because due to the lockdown and so many agencies stopping, there will be all the agencies stopping. There will not be as many agencies starting up on the other side, but those fundraisers are still looking for work and they will get picked up. So the number of donors signed up, I think, will increase on the other side. There will be just as many fundraisers in the industry, just not working for as many different employers. And that could have a long-term good effect on the industry as a career, with there not being as many organisations. Who knows? But as far as the support for the charities goes, I think they will get back what they lost very quickly if they get back into the market very quickly. Alternatively, in July, all forms of fundraising are supposed to start again, but there are a lot of very heavy restrictions on how we work, and we all have to comply with that. And if anyone steps out of line, it risks the whole lot of us. So I think everyone will be very, very... If our clients want us to work in hazmat suits, we will do so. If the regulatory body wants us to, keep a 10-metre distance but raise our voices, we will do that as well. And I think that there will be a lot better compliance with all sorts of things on the other side of this. And I think the donors and the public will actually be quite generous when they're being spoken to again, especially in charities that have anything to do with medical or pandemics or those kinds of things. So there's been innovative ideas like that happening that people have been quite generous in getting behind. So it's not necessarily financial. And that's one of the problems over here when we have bushfires. People look around their house and donate all their stuff. So they end up with more physical things than money. When the Black Saturday bushfires happened, I slipped, my wife's from that part of Victoria, I slipped a few notes under my neighbour's doors in the apartment building I was living in, saying that we're driving down on Wednesday. If you want to donate anything, toothbrushes, toothpaste, toiletries, stuff like that. And that was on Saturday. And by Tuesday night, we needed to get a donation of from a storage place of boxes. And we ended up with 27 packing boxes. People from the eastern suburbs donated suits to farmers. One of the neighbours had a nanny who lived in the western suburbs. She photocopied the note that I put under people's doors and gave it out in her neighbourhood. And the western suburbs, it went crazy. We ended up having to ask Lynn Fox to truck it down because I only had a two-door convertible. So Australians do tend to be quite generous in situations like that. So it'll be interesting to see how it translates in this kind of a medical thing and how they go with supporting all the issues created by the economic collapse, the lockdown, the loss of jobs, as well as medical type organisations such as Médecins Sans Frontières that are working on the ground in places. I mean, when COVID goes nuts in Africa, that's going to be quite a long time of work for a group like MSF. So it'll be interesting to see over the next 12 months how well Australians react to supporting countries that don't have a medical infrastructure.